The dense silence that fell after the manager's final scream seemed to weigh down every inch of the marble lobby, as if the KM Group building itself were ashamed of what it was witnessing. The cruel words hurled coldly by that woman, cloaked in authority and arrogance, had been like sharp blades that cut not only Ha-eun's self-esteem, but also the fragile equilibrium of a young woman who had already faced too many rejections in her short career. The scene, which should have been muffled by corporate routine, turned into a cruel spectacle, watched by apathetic faces, most of whom simply watched, as if the pain of others were a distant noise. Yet, amidst all the gazes that judged, laughed, or hid in the comfort of omission, there was one gaze that wouldn't waver, a pair of fixed eyes filled with restraint but also with growing discomfort. This man, dressed in an impeccably tailored suit and with an expression that blended silent disapproval with something deeper, observed every detail of Ha-eun's humiliation with a kind of attention not seen in distant leaders. He wasn't just any supervisor, nor a director on a sporadic visit. He was Kang Jun-woo, the company's founder and CEO, whose presence was rarely noticed, precisely because he chose to walk among his people unannounced, preferring to get to know his employees' essence away from the lights and red carpets. At that moment, while Ha-eun was still on her knees, her hands trembling as she tried to gather the exposed fragments of her dignity, Jun-woo decided he could no longer watch in silence. His firm step on the marble reverberated like a sentence. And then, before everyone, with the deep voice that sealed final decisions, he looked up at the manager and declared clearly, "This employee is not being fired. From today onwards, she works directly with me." And at that exact moment, without anyone expecting it, the most humiliating fall in Ha-eun's life turned into the beginning of the most unexpected turn of events in her entire history. If you enjoy heart-touching stories and unexpected twists that make your heart race, subscribe to the channel and leave a like so you don't miss any episode. Before anyone could imagine who that young woman was, humiliated in front of so many eyes, her story had already begun long before, in a place far from the cold glare of Seoul. Busan, with its hills meeting the sea and its simple streets filled with small markets, was the setting where Ha-eun learned to survive. As a child, she lost her parents in a car accident that left scars not only on her body, but especially on her soul. Raised by her maternal grandmother, a woman with calloused hands and a resilient smile, Ha-eun grew up surrounded by old stories and whispered prayers at night, as if her grandmother wanted to protect her granddaughter from the weight of an unfair world. With each simple meal shared in cracked ceramic bowls, she understood that love could be stronger than any absence. Even without resources, Ha-eun always excelled in her studies. She spent hours in public libraries, copying passages from books because she couldn't afford them. She dreamed of graduating with a degree in business administration, and one day repaying her grandmother for all the care she received. But life, relentless, forced her to interrupt her studies to take temporary jobs, waitressing in small restaurants, working at convenience stores, and working part-time as a secretary in offices that never gave her a real opportunity for advancement. Each of these jobs left a silent mark on her, one who wanted to be seen not for her poverty, but for her worth. However, prejudice always followed her. Some commented on her simple clothes, some mocked her country accent, some looked at her as if she were invisible. And yet, Ha-eun didn't give up. It was courage that took her to Seoul. With a small suitcase, a folder filled with resumes printed on plain paper, and the dream of landing a life-changing internship, she set off. For the first few months, she lived in a tiny room on the outskirts of the city, sharing the space with cockroaches and the hope of better days. The days were long, the interviews frustrating, but there was always a flame that refused to go out. When he finally got a temporary position at KM Group, felt that destiny offered her a chance, however small, to prove who she truly was. It was in this very building, now the scene of her humiliation, that she placed all her faith that life could change. Every step he took through the luxurious hallways was also a reminder of the gulf between his humble origins and that world of expensive suits and designer shoes. Yet, deep in his heart, he carried the promise he made to his grandmother. He would never be ashamed of who he was. And perhaps it was precisely this quiet pride that so bothered those who despised her. Ha-eun didn't fully bow to humiliation, and this resistance further angered those who believed she shouldn't be there. But if life seemed determined to test her strength, something invisible was about to turn the tide, because among the scornful looks that surrounded her in that marble hall, there was a different look. A look that would change everything. Who was that man in the impeccable suit watching silently, and why couldn't his eyes leave Ha-eun's, even in the face of such embarrassment? As Ha-eun tried to pick up the shreds of her dignity scattered across the cold lobby floor, the faint sound of firm footsteps approached. Amidst the hurried executives and secretaries whispering about the humiliating scene, a man emerged who seemed out of place in the building's everyday life. Kang Min-ho, known only to his closest directors, walked with a posture that conveyed authority without needing to be announced. His dark, perfectly tailored suit reflected the sobriety of someone accustomed to making decisions that changed entire destinies. He took his time. His eyes followed every gesture, every cutting word from the manager, every cruel laugh from those watching. There was something enigmatic in his gaze, a mixture of coldness and calculation, as if he were studying not only Ha-eun, but the entire scene around her. No one immediately realized that this man was not just another executive. To many, he seemed merely an important visitor. Ha-eun, lost in her own grief, didn't even lift her head to look at him. She was busy trying to put her grandmother's handkerchief back in the bottom of her bag, as if that small object could protect her from all shame. But Min-ho never took his eyes off her, observing every detail, the way she fought back tears, the quiet strength in her gestures, the subtle glow of a dignity that insisted on surviving even crushed by humiliation. The silence that hung around him was almost palpable. Employees who recognized him at a glance glanced at each other in panic, but didn't dare speak. It was as if they feared any movement might disrupt what was about to happen. Ha-eun didn't know it, but that discreet, attentive gaze held the promise of a future she could never have imagined. Fate, which had so often turned its back on her, seemed to finally prepare a different scenario, where her humble life would intersect with that man's silent power. But before any words could be spoken, the weight of humiliation would still need to increase. Because fate likes to test hearts to the limit before revealing its surprises. The silence that had formed for a few moments was abruptly broken by the shrill voice of Mrs. Han, which seemed to feed on Ha-eun's shame. Arms crossed and eyes narrowed, she took a step forward, as if to ensure that the young woman would never forget the weight of her fury. "What are you still doing here?" he shouted, his hand pointing directly at the building's main door. "This place isn't for people like you. Get out immediately before I have security drag you out myself." The words cut through the air like sharp blades. Ha-eun, still bent over gathering the last pages of the scattered report, felt her body shiver. There was no room for defense, no chance for explanation. The muffled laughter of some colleagues grew louder, and venomous comments began to circulate like snakes ready to bite. "Look at that. She even looks like a beggar with that old bag," someone murmured. "How did she think she could work here?" another quipped. With each cruel word, Ha-eun felt her heart tighten. The tears she had managed to hold back threatened to escape, but she still fought to hold her head high. She took a deep breath, trying to cling to what dignity she had left, even as two tall, imposing security guards approached, obeying the manager's orders. "Take her out, now!" Mrs. Han ordered, a triumphant smile on her face. The security guards, without question, held Ha-eun's frail arms, and she instinctively resisted, but she lacked the strength to face this public scene. The revolving doors of the entrance were just a few meters away, and each shuffling step seemed to increase the weight of the humiliation. People watched as if it were a spectacle. Some shook their heads in mock disapproval. Others laughed shamelessly. It was as if the entire building had united against her. Just then, her grandmother's embroidered handkerchief slipped out of her bag again and fell to the floor. Ha-eun, desperate, tried to lean over to pick it up, but was pulled back violently, hearing even louder laughter. The symbol of affection that had sustained her for so many years now lay abandoned before indifferent gazes. Her heart begged for someone to reach out, someone to even see the brutal injustice unfolding. But no one moved. It was as if the city itself had decreed she was unworthy to remain there. However, while everyone was enjoying Ha-eun's downfall, one pair of eyes remained fixed on her. The man in the dark suit, who hadn't yet spoken, watched with growing intensity. His clenched fists betrayed that something was beginning to boil inside, even though his expression remained controlled. And it was exactly at that moment, when the humiliation seemed unbearable, that the unexpected was about to happen, challenging all the eyes that believed they already knew the end of that scene. The lobby seemed to reek of cruelty as security guards pulled Ha-eun toward the main door. Curious eyes followed her every step, as if it were a rehearsed scene to entertain the corporate elite. Mrs. Han, with a victorious smile, straightened her blazer and lifted her chin, certain she had eliminated yet another intruder from the territory she believed she controlled. For her, this wasn't just discipline, but a way to demonstrate who wielded power. Ha-eun, tears welling in her eyes, tried to retrieve her grandmother's handkerchief from the marble floor, but the strong arms of the security guards wouldn't let her go. Her heart screamed silently, as if each beat were a cry for help that no one seemed willing to hear. It was as if her entire life, marked by silent battles and defeats, had culminated in that moment of absolute exposure. But the sound of a deep, firm and unexpected voice cut through the air like a blade. "Stop. Now." The entire lobby fell silent. The security guards froze instantly, still holding Ha-eun's arms. Their gazes turned to find the source of the order, and it was then that the figure of Kang Min-ho stepped forward. His steps were slow, but they carried an authority that seemed to dominate the entire space. The echo of his shoes against the cold floor heightened the tension, while everyone's hearts seemed to beat in unison. "Let her go," he said again, this time looking at the security guards, who hesitated for a second before obeying. Ha-eun staggered as she regained her freedom and, confused, looked up for the first time at the man interceding for her. She didn't know who he was, but his intense, controlled eyes made her feel something she'd never experienced before, a strange mix of fear and protectiveness. Mrs. Han tried to compose herself, but her voice wavered as she asked, "Sir, who are you to interrupt an internal disciplinary process?" The silence that followed was deafening. With a slight movement of his hand, Min-ho pulled from his pocket a gold badge reflecting the KM Group crest. Everyone held their breath as they recognized the symbol few had the privilege of bearing. "I own this building, this company, and every contract that supports this corporation." His voice didn't tremble, but each syllable sounded like a definitive sentence. "And from today onward, this employee works for me." A collective murmur rippled through the lobby. Eyes met in shock, and some employees backed away discreetly, as if they wanted to disappear under the weight of the revelation. Mrs. Han paled, unable to meet the CEO's gaze. Her victory had slipped away like sand through her fingers. Ha-eun, stunned, couldn't react immediately. Her heart raced as if it wanted to burst from her chest, and her legs trembled to the point of almost giving out. She never imagined that this man, so far removed from her world, would intercede for her, especially with such definitive words. "Come with me," Min-ho said, leaving no room for reply. His tone wasn't an invitation, but a decisive order. He turned and began walking toward the private elevator, leaving behind a heavy silence. The lobby, once a scene of cruel laughter, had now become a scene of absolute astonishment. Every eye followed his movements, trying to understand why the most powerful man in the company had chosen the humiliated girl. Ha-eun hesitantly clutched her grandmother's handkerchief, which she had finally retrieved, to her chest and, with unsteady steps, followed the CEO. She didn't know where she was being taken, nor the reason for her sudden defense, but one thing was certain: her life would never be the same. What Ha-eun still couldn't imagine was that simple gesture wouldn't just be a momentary protection, but the beginning of an unexpected new beginning that would change everything she knew. The exclusive elevator rose silently, carrying two people who had never imagined they would be side by side. Ha-eun, still stunned, remained with her eyes fixed on the floor, trying to understand if this was reality or just a strange dream about to collapse. The doors opened onto a floor few employees even knew about. The executive floor, reserved only for the president and the board of directors. As she entered, her hesitant steps contrasted with the luxurious surroundings. Imported rugs covered the floor, the walls displayed contemporary artwork, and a panoramic view of Seoul unfolded through immense glass windows. To Ha-eun, it all seemed like an unattainable world, made only for those born into privilege. Kang Min-ho walked steadily ahead, never looking back, until he stopped in front of a huge room. He pushed open the door and entered, letting her follow him. In the center of the space, on a shiny, dark wooden table, lay a gold badge. He picked it up and, without ceremony, held it out to her. "From now on, you are my personal assistant." Ha-eun blinked several times, disbelieving what she was hearing. The words sounded so unreal that they took a while to sink in. Her voice was shaky, almost a whisper. "But why? I don't understand." The CEO studied her for a few seconds, as if weighing her choice of words. Then he replied, with a tone that blended cold logic with something inexplicably human. "Because I saw something in you that no one else here saw." He didn't elaborate, just handed her the badge. Ha-eun, still unsure, reached out and touched the shiny object. It was heavy. Unlike the ordinary badges she'd seen before, this wasn't just an access card, it was the symbol of a chance that would change the course of her life. In the following days, the young woman became acquainted with the frenetic pace of the executive suite. Meeting schedules, confidential reports, international calls. Each new task was a challenge, but also an opportunity to prove to herself that she wasn't the failure so many perceived her to be. Min-ho silently observed her efforts, testing her dedication in every detail. Despite the constant fear of failure, Ha-eun clung to her work as if it were her only lifeline. The memory of the humiliation she'd suffered in the lobby still burned within her, but somehow the unexpected opportunity offered by the CEO ignited a hope she'd long since lost. The contrast between her humble origins and that luxurious world never faded. Often alone in her living room at the end of the day, she would look out over the Seoul night view and wonder if she truly belonged there. What Ha-eun didn't know yet was that, between commitments and new responsibilities, small gestures would begin to bring her closer to Min-ho in a way that no one would be able to stop. Ha-eun's early days as the CEO's personal assistant were marked by tension and insecurity. Every task felt like an invisible test, every glance from Min-ho a mystery. There were times when he remained completely silent during meetings, only signaling with his hands for her to take notes or organize documents. His professional coolness contrasted with his public defense of her, and this contradiction troubled her heart. But little by little, small cracks began to reveal the man behind the rigid posture. One autumn morning, as the icy wind blew through the penthouse windows, Min-ho offered her a cup of hot tea without saying a word. Ha-eun, surprised by the gesture, accepted it gratefully, feeling that there was more care in that silence than in many words. During breaks, conversations inevitably arose. Over a quick lunch in his office, she told him about Busan, about her grandmother who still ran a small grocery store alone at the local market, about her interrupted dreams of studying. Min-ho listened silently, but his eyes revealed something beyond mere curiosity. It was as if, in that moment, he saw not just the employee, but the woman who carried a life of scars and courage. As the weeks passed, their relationship developed a delicate balance. Min-ho, accustomed to employees who obeyed him without question, began to notice a rare sincerity in Ha-eun. She wasn't afraid to admit when she was wrong, but always sought to correct it. And this transparency, which could be seen as a weakness in such a competitive environment, became her greatest strength in his eyes. One afternoon, while reviewing confidential reports, Ha-eun noticed Min-ho discreetly massaging his wrist, as if hiding pain. She gently asked if he was okay. The CEO, who rarely spoke about himself, revealed that he was suffering from the after effects of an old accident, something he rarely shared with anyone. This brief moment of vulnerability created a bridge between them, an invisible thread that connected their stories. It wasn't long before the company hallways began to whisper. The closeness between the CEO and his new assistant didn't go unnoticed. There were envious glances, malicious whispers, and attempts to belittle Ha-eun. But for every cruel word, she found in Min-ho's gaze a kind of silent support that strengthened her. The two began to share not only physical space, but also unexpected confidences. One night after a long meeting, Min-ho offered to drive her to the simple boarding house where he lived. The journey was silent until he asked, "Why did you never give up, even after everything you've faced?" Ha-eun took a deep breath before answering, looking out the car window at the city lights. "Because giving up would mean betraying everything my grandmother sacrificed for me." Min-ho didn't respond, but that moment remained etched in his memory. For the first time in a long time, he felt someone speak the truth, without expecting anything in return. Their bond grew stronger like a flame that, though discreet, withstood all headwinds. Every gesture, every word, every shared silence shaped a relationship that transcended the boundaries of work and began to touch forbidden territories of the heart. However, the closer they became, the greater the shadow of those who would not accept this connection would grow. And soon, opposition would arise to try to destroy what was just beginning to flourish. The growing closeness between Ha-eun and Min-ho did not go unnoticed within the icy corridors of KM. What were once timid whispers quickly turned into persistent, venomous rumors. Employees who didn't dare confront the CEO directly found gossip to be their most powerful weapon. At every coffee break, in every whispered conversation in the break room, Ha-eun's name was uttered with contempt. "Of course you got that special assistant position for personal reasons," a secretary muttered, arching her eyebrow mischievously. "Who does she think she is? A street urchin, now walking side by side with the company president," added another employee. Those words pierced like invisible arrows. Ha-eun, still trying to adapt to her new role, felt the heavy gazes and cutting comments in every room she passed. The humiliation that once came from a single person now seemed to multiply in every corner of the corporation. But the real storm began when Seo Min-ho's ex-fiancée, Yeon-ah, returned to the scene. the daughter of a traditional South Korean elite family, educated abroad and accustomed to dominating luxurious surroundings, Yeon-ah had the perfect appearance of someone molded to occupy the position alongside a powerful CEO. Her presence made an immediate impact. Impeccable clothes, proud posture, calculated smile. She appeared at one of the board meetings representing international investors. The reunion with Min-ho was shrouded in formality, but her eyes, as they rested on Ha-eun, seated discreetly beside the CEO, revealed a glint of disdain. To Yeon-ah, this plainly dressed young woman was a personal affront, an invader who had usurped a place she considered rightfully hers. At the first opportunity, Yeon-ah made a point of approaching Ha-eun. With a fake smile, she leaned in to speak softly, so only she could hear. "Enjoy it while you can, dear. People like you don't last long in this world." The words, laced with venom, echoed in Ha-eun's mind for days. And as if that weren't enough, the press soon got involved. Sensational headlines began. Circulating on blogs and gossip sites, KM Group CEO involved with subordinate employee, forbidden romance threatens company reputation. External pressure mounted with each passing week. Investors quietly questioned Min-ho's conduct, while shareholders whispered about potential consequences for the business. It was as if everyone had banded together to turn a sincere relationship into a scandal that could destroy careers. Ha-eun, feeling trapped again, spent sleepless nights. She remembered her grandmother, her promise to never be ashamed of her origins, but the weight of the accusations was unbearable. With every step she took, she seemed to hear accusatory voices reminding her that she didn't belong there. Still, there were times when Min-ho, sensing her vulnerability, would protect her with firm gestures. He ignored the gossip, faced the council with a steely gaze, and wouldn't allow Yeon-ah to invade the space he had chosen to share with Ha-eun. However, the more he showed support, the more ferocious his attempts to destroy her became. One night, Ha-eun left the company and found newspaper clippings thrown at her door, all with derogatory headlines. It was a clear warning. Someone was trying to remind her that she would never be accepted in this world. She held the papers in her hands, silently tearing at them, and realized that, despite all the strength she tried to cultivate, there was only so much a wounded heart could bear. The pressure was becoming unbearable, and the fear of hurting the man who had rescued her from humiliation began to speak louder. It was at this point of exhaustion that a painful decision ripened in her heart: to disappear, even if it meant breaking her own destiny to protect the man she silently loved. The following weeks became a real burden for Ha-eun. Every time she walked through the hallways of KM Group, she felt the judgmental stares. Conversations would stop as she passed, and muffled laughter would soon follow. The weight of the headlines vilifying her in the press still echoed in her mind, reminding her that she was at the center of a scandal that could shatter not only her life, but also Min-ho's reputation. In that suffocating environment, she began to wonder if staying by his side would be a mistake. The gratitude she felt at having been defended in front of everyone mixed with a silent fear that she might be the reason for his downfall. While the CEO stood firm, facing the opposition with the same ruthless approach he used in business, Ha-eun felt increasingly vulnerable. One rainy night, sitting in her small boarding house room, she opened the old notebook where she kept notes of interrupted dreams. Between tear-stained pages, she scribbled a letter with trembling hands. With each word she wrote, it was as if she were tearing a piece of her own heart. "President Kang, I owe you more than I can ever repay. You gave me dignity when everyone else stole it from me, and I will never forget that. But I don't belong in your world. People like me only hinder it, and I don't want to be the shadow that drags your name down. Perhaps one day I will understand my decision. but now I must go." She folded the paper carefully, as if it were a silent farewell not only to Min-ho, but also to everything she had dared to dream. The next morning, before the sun illuminated the buildings of Seoul, Ha-eun left the letter on his desk, next to the gold badge that symbolized her sudden rise. She left, without looking back, each step echoing like a final sentence. When Min-ho arrived at the office and found the letter, a heavy silence fell over the room. His eyes scanned each line with increasing intensity until his fists clenched. No amount of coldness could hide the pain of loss. Meanwhile, Ha-eun was already walking the streets of Seoul with a simple suitcase in hand. Her face was wet not only from the light rain, but also from the tears she couldn't hold back. All she wanted was to protect the man who had transformed her life, even if it meant erasing herself from his. However, fate rarely allows sacrificial decisions to end in silence, and very soon, an unexpected gesture from Min-ho would transform their escape into a reunion capable of changing everything. The letter left on the table wouldn't leave Kang Min-ho's mind. For hours he remained silent, staring at those lines that sounded like a sentence of abandonment. The coldness that had always characterized him toward business seemed to crumble, and for the first time in a long time, a painful emptiness settled within him. For Min-ho, losing Ha-eun wasn't just losing a devoted assistant. It was losing the only person who had managed to penetrate his defenses and touch the most vulnerable part of his heart. Determined not to accept that goodbye, Min-ho began a relentless search. He used his security team to track her last steps, but Ha-eun seemed to have disappeared from the city. Her returned badge and the absence of any contact were like daggers reminding him that she had chosen to disappear of her own free will. Still, he didn't give up. He had learned in business that when something truly mattered, giving up was never an option. It took days of searching until, finally, a clue led him to Hongdae, a bohemian neighborhood in Seoul, known for its streets lined with small cafes, live music, and independent artists. There, in a discreet cafe illuminated by yellow lights, Min-ho found her. Ha-eun was behind the encounter, serving drinks with a tired but kind smile. Her simple apron contrasted with the image he had of her beside him in the luxurious expanse of the KM Group. For a few seconds, he simply watched her, as if intent on capturing every detail of the scene. The way she tucked her hair behind her ear, the way she politely served customers, the way she maintained her composure even though she knew she'd escaped something much bigger. When he finally approached, Ha-eun's eyes widened in shock. The cup she was holding nearly slipped from her hands, but she managed to place it on the counter before it fell. "President Kang," he murmured, his voice breaking, "what are you doing here?" Min-ho didn't respond immediately. His silence was thick, heavy with something that words could hardly convey. Then, in front of all the customers filling the small space, he stepped forward and did something no one could have predicted. He knelt before her. The shock was immediate. Murmurs rippled through the cafe, and some customers pulled out their phones to record the scene. Panicked, Ha-eun tried to pull him by the arm, but he held her hand firmly and held her still. "I came because I don't accept your goodbye." His voice was firm but charged with emotion. "You said you don't belong in my world, but what you didn't realize is that my world has become unbearable without you in it." The tears Ha-eun was trying to hold back streamed down her face uncontrollably. Her heart beat like an out-of-time drum, torn between fear of the consequences and the overwhelming force of those words. "But the press, the comments, your reputation," he tried to argue, his voice wavering. Min-ho interrupted her without letting go of her hand. "Let them talk. Let them judge me. I'd rather lose contracts, shares, and partnerships than lose you." He looked up, staring at her with an almost unbearable intensity. "You're the woman I chose, Ha-eun, and there's nothing that can change that." The entire cafe fell. silent. Even the barista stopped in his tracks to watch the scene. It was as if everyone knew they were witnessing a moment they wouldn't forget. Ha-eun, overcome with emotion, knelt down too, unable to resist the force of that public and unwavering love. The embrace that followed was filled with everything they had repressed: pain, fear, hope, and redemption. The people around applauded, some moved, others simply surprised. But for the two of them, none of that mattered. In that moment, amid the smell of fresh coffee and the rain falling outside, two lives intertwined for good. Min-ho's gesture wasn't just a declaration of love, it was a public test, a challenge to an entire world that believed it could dictate who was worthy of love. But even with the reunion sealed by the most daring act a man like Min-ho could perform, the story was not yet complete. For true reconciliation would require more than words and applause. After the breathtaking gesture at the Hongdae Cafe, nothing could ever be the same again. The news spread quickly across social media and newspapers, turning Kang Min-ho's public act into national headlines. While many criticized the CEO's boldness, others saw the scene as proof of a genuine love that defied social conventions. And at the center of it all was Ha-eun, still trying to understand how her life, marked by so much loss, could now be a symbol of a story that inspired so many. In the following days, Min-ho made it clear to the entire company and shareholders that his decision was final. He called the board together, faced their hostile looks, and stated without hesitation, "If her presence is a problem for business, then the problem is me." The words echoed like a decree, dismantling resistance. For the first time, Ha-eun realized she wasn't alone in fighting the trials. The man who had once seemed unreachable was now also her shield. Their reconciliation didn't just happen in public, but also in private moments. Min-ho picked up Ha-eun's grandmother in Busan, taking her to Seoul so she could witness her granddaughter's new life up close. Their reunion was marked by tears and smiles, and the elderly woman's heart finally found peace in seeing that the young woman, so often humiliated, was now valued and loved. In a symbolic gesture, Min-ho organized a simple ceremony in a Seoul garden, surrounded by flowers and lanterns that illuminated the night. There was no extravagant luxury, just sincerity, in front of close friends. And a few employees who had grown to respect Ha-eun, he made a simple request. "I don't need alliances or contracts. I just need you to agree to walk by my side." The words, devoid of any pomp, touched Ha-eun deeply. She nodded with tears in her eyes, and the hug that followed was accompanied by warm applause. In that moment, all the barriers that had previously separated them seemed to have disappeared. Their life, however, did not promise to be without challenges. The business world would remain demanding, the elite would remain vigilant, and the press would pay close attention to every detail. But for Ha-eun, none of that mattered. What had once been loneliness now became a partnership. And the young woman who had been rejected in front of everyone was now recognized as someone who had earned not only a place, but also an unbreakable love. Even so, the story needed one last scene, a message that would mark not only Ha-eun and Min-ho's lives, but also the hearts of everyone who believed in the power of hope and true love. A few months had passed since the day Min-ho knelt before Ha-eun in Hongdae. Life seemed to have found a new rhythm, more serene, but also more meaningful. Ha-eun, now adapted to her trusted role at the CEO's side, was no longer just the insecure young woman who trembled under cruel gazes. She bore the mark of someone who had faced the darkness of humiliation and yet dared to believe she could rise again. On a sunny spring afternoon, she walked the company corridors with firm steps. There were no more whispers behind her, only respectful greetings. Her presence, once questioned, had now become a symbol of resistance. Still, Ha-eun never forgot where she came from. She kept the scarf embroidered by her grandmother in her purse, reminding herself daily of her roots and all the struggles that shaped her. That week, she welcomed a young intern into the administrative department. The nervous and insecure girl dropped a stack of folders in front of everyone and blushed with embarrassment. Ha-eun's involuntary gesture was immediate. She knelt beside her, helping her gather the documents, smiling tenderly and offering words of encouragement. It was as if the past were repeating itself before her eyes, but this time she was on the opposite side of history, offering the hand she had once longed to receive. At the end of her shift, watching the sunset through the huge window on the executive floor, Ha-eun reflected on everything she had experienced. She thought about Busan, her grandmother, the temporary jobs, the humiliations, the moment she believed she was alone. And now, there, beside Min-ho, she understood that nothing had been in vain. Every tear, every pain, every apparent defeat had prepared her to recognize the value of being where she was. Min-ho approached silently, rested his hand on her shoulder, and said with the simplicity of someone who no longer needed to prove anything to the world, "You don't need to be ashamed of who you are. Your strength has always been what inspired me." His words were met with an emotional smile. The future would still bring challenges, but in that moment, Ha-eun felt she could finally breathe without fear. And so, the young woman who had been kicked out in front of everyone, humiliated and ridiculed, now became living proof that love and hope can transform any destiny. Her story was not just about romance, but also about dignity, courage, and redemption. If this story touched your heart, be sure to subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and share this video with someone who needs to believe in true love. Each story here is a reminder that even in the worst of times, there can always be a new beginning.